Before we begin, a word of warning. This episode discusses issues related to racism, white supremacy, and genocide. Hello, and welcome to Tech.0, the show about technology, people, and politics with Chris and Ben. You're listening to episode 9, released in June 2021. My name is Ben, and as ever, I'm joined by Chris.
Hi there.
In this episode, we'll be discussing Basecamp's controversial decision to block political topics at work. Let's get to it.
So, today's topic is rather heavy. I don't know how much detail you've actually read about this, Ben, but Basecamp, the leadership there, so that's DHH, who created Ruby on Rails, and Jason Fried. The initial wording, the public wording that was put out, was that there were no more societal and political discussions on our company Basecamp account, with a final point saying, "No forgetting what we do here. We make project management, team communication, and email software. We are not a social impact company." And, the ordering of some of this is a little bit confusing at times, but that essentially led to an exit of about a third of the company's engineering staff. And I've sort of gone back through and tried to get the full details of what has happened here. A lot of this has come from The Verge's article on it, because they found a lot of the staff and interviewed them and found, to get the full picture. So, what had apparently happened is a bunch of staff internally had volunteered to improve the company's diversity and inclusion efforts, which I think is very admirable. It's a good thing to be doing.
Absolutely.
And as part of this, they had dug up this list that someone had created years ago of offensive, potentially racist nicknames for customers that were used internally, not used externally. It's not super professional. Not very nice things to do at all. The group that was set up to improve the inclusion and diversity within the company then also sort of said, look, we need to handle this. The company needs to recognise that this was wrong and make sure processes are in place to stop it happening again. I don't think anyone was screaming about making it public or a huge thing, but they did want to properly understand the seriousness of it. And in part of that discussion, an employee linked to the Anti-Defamation League, they have a document called the Pyramid of Hate, which demonstrates how the sort of acceptance of smaller biases and microaggressions and the normalization of them can lead to further normalization of more extreme behaviors. So, those small biases that you don't deal with in both the society and yourself then get turned into larger problems, bullying, job rejection, which then, again, if that is not properly handled and that becomes normalized, it can again lead to worse behaviors. The top of this pyramid of hate is genocide. And this is obviously, this is not trying to say that a microaggression or a slip of the tongue mistake or your own personal bias, because everybody has some bias, leads directly to genocide. But it's trying to say that the normalization and acceptance of that and not fighting against it is a path towards it. That was I believe, the act that prompted them to ban societal discussion, because a number of the management team took that to mean that the relationship was direct and took it to be a very aggressive statement. And they had a meeting, which I believe happened after the blog post was published. But at the meeting, Ryan Singer, who has worked for them for a very long time, and he was, I can't remember what he was now, product strategy, head of product strategy or something in those lines, said, "I strongly disagree. We live in a white supremacist culture. I don't believe a lot of reframing around implicit bias. I think a lot of this is actually racist." And Jason Fried, the obviously most senior member there, DHH was present, but was apparently not feeling very well and was rather quiet on the call. Fried thanked him for his comments and moved the discussion on. And then later on, a black employee in the meeting wanted to revisit the marks. He said, "The fact that you can be a white male and come to this meeting and call people racist and say white supremacy doesn't exist when it's blatant at this company, that is white privilege. The fact that he wasn't corrected and was in fact thanked, it makes me sick." And I'm skipping some of it. Fried tried to move the conversation on, and there was some backwards and forwards with Singer. And at the very end of the discussion, Fried and DHH were asked to denounce white supremacy, and Fried responded with, "I'm not here to share my personal views on anything. I'm horrified when one group dominates another." Fried, who is Jewish, added that he lost relatives during the Holocaust. "I think it's absolutely the most disgusting thing in the world, but I can't say that's happening here." And a lot of employees there decided that was it. Like, all he had to say was, "Yes, I condemn white supremacy," and he was unwilling to do it. He picked defending a member of management over that. And there was an end statement from someone that was apparently made in the meeting that I think is quite appropriate. I just want to read it. "Racism and white supremacy are not things that are so convenient that they only happen when full intention is present, or true malice is present. Evil is not required. We're not so lucky for this to come down to good and evil. It's as simple as creating a space where people do not feel welcome. The silence in the background is what racism and white supremacy does. It creates that atmosphere that feels suffocating to people. It doesn't require active malice. It's not that convenient." And yeah, certainly after this meeting, potentially before, Basecamp lost about a third of their employees as a result of this. And as far as I'm aware, that's where we are now. Not much has changed that I could find in terms of the company policy. And yeah, the employees have left, and the policy is the same as it was.
And it's probably important to point out at this point, we're sitting here towards the very end of May. This happened in April of this year.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had over a month since this news broke, and we've had that time, and it's pretty much dropped out of the news cycle. You get the odd mention of it in a online news article from time to time. But it is very broadly out of people's minds now, I believe. We've moved on to other bits of news.
Yeah, it has moved on now. I think some of that hopefully gives us a maybe slightly more considered perspective. But even saying that, I don't think there's much in it this on this particular issue. Like, I think both of us feel that Basecamp's leadership are very much in the wrong, and that it's certainly very obvious to me that white supremacy is still present in our society and still has a great amount of effect in our society. And I 100% agree that it's not as easy as just, oh, there were some very evil people and we got rid of them. It doesn't stop. Like, it's not a thing that you can just stamp out and wipe your hands of it.
So, kind of before hearing a bit of that, I'd done some reading around the subject. Obviously, I'd seen some of the news that came out at the time. And it very much came across to me prior to hearing what you just read, that it almost feels like one of these things that you can imagine somebody putting into place because it sounds very broadly like a good idea. I know that I have worked in places before where my political views or my views on, shall we say, contentious topics has been very much in the minority. I've been maybe the only one out of sort of a pod of 6 or 7 people with a particular viewpoint, and it's led to some fairly intimidating discussions. It's led to feeling quite uncomfortable while at work, and so on the outset to basically say we want to limit people feeling like that. I can see the appeal from that level. The problem is that generally when you have so first of all, I think there's potential nuance that people just don't get, but also what having sort of this sort of rather broad stroke allows you to do is to unintentionally, perhaps because you were maybe in your mind you were nuanced, brush over a whole swathe of other topics which you probably didn't even conceive. The problem here is that doesn't seem to wholly be the case. They don't seem to have gone, oh, it would be a good idea if maybe somebody didn't feel a bit awkward for having an all right minority viewpoint. What they've done is gone, I've said this, and I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that we all do need to be able to work together. Like, it's very difficult to, like, you're never going to end up in a situation where you're working with people you agree with on everything. And but I just don't think banning discussion is the solution to that. I think the core side of it comes down to another employee's brought this up in the article. What is politics? I found the Wikipedia discussion to really the Wikipedia definition to get a feel for it, and Wikipedia defines it as: politics is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations between individuals, such as the distribution of resources or status. And I can't think of any part of my life where I engage with that more than work. Like, all of the time at work, I'm dealing with power relations between me and customers, me and other staff members, me and wider organizations that I might be involved with. Like, we have a certain amount of resources available to us, and the company has a certain status, and individuals with it will have a certain status. It's kind of a natural human situation there, and we have to make decisions as a group. I think being in a company is fundamentally political.
Just jumping in on that, there's and even some of our language goes to show that if you've got yourself into a sticky situation, if you've got a customer or a client or whatever that is maybe waiving their contract and saying you've not done this bit, and you're waiving the contract back saying but you didn't do that bit, we say it's gotten political. The language that we use around it is political.
Yeah, but I'd say even before then is political. It's just maybe the happier side of it. Like, just because everybody's working well together and the project's on time and on budget and everything's going good, doesn't mean there's not power relations happening there. It just means they happen to be working at least in that little bubble, in a positive manner.
Yes.
I also fundamentally believe that a workplace has to be welcoming for everyone. Like, if we're By excluding people from work, we would prevent them from being able to support themselves, certainly being able to give themselves a good standard of living. And I think it's very, very important that we make sure workplaces are welcoming. Which leads us on to, and I know this is a popular sort of side of this discussion to make these days, but the paradox of intolerance. Like, do you have to be so tolerant that you tolerate intolerance? Because what will then happen is when intolerant people join your organization, they will start to behave in a way that pushes out the more tolerant people, and before long your entire organization could be full of very intolerant people. And this happens at both a societal level and at an organizational level. And I mean, yeah, I genuinely think, like, there's a point that I would come to where if I was working with someone who was telling me that white supremacy doesn't exist, and that aspects are not present in our lives, I would have misgivings about working with that person any further. I don't know how you build a welcoming organisation with someone like that, especially not in a leadership position.
I think it would be useful to go over, for me as well, it would be useful to go over how, probably going over the paradox a little more, how can you be welcoming to everybody when you've just described a position where you're not going to be welcoming to an individual because they in turn are not going to be welcoming? By saying you want to be welcoming to everybody, you're excluding people.
Which is why it's a paradox. I mean, the normally accepted answer to the paradox of intolerance is that you just have to exclude intolerant people. Like, there's no way of doing it that keeps people in through. Like, even if you believe that intolerant people are naturally born intolerant, like, you still have to exclude them because, and yeah, maybe you support them in other ways, but they will not allow the rest of the organisation to be tolerant. So something else I wanted to bring up about this as well is, like, a bit of a discussion about Tech 0.0 and how this kind of came about and what we both get out of it, because we have sort of directly put politics into the subtitle of the show, and I think for me that's an important part of the show. I don't want it to be the entirety of it. Like, we talk about technology a lot as well, I hope. But yeah, what does that side of it mean to you? Where are you coming from, Ben?
So I think it'd be good at this point to maybe zip back for me and go back to some of the early discussions we had. Both of us do another podcast, and we would often find ourselves, in fact, even sort of going back slightly further than that, both of us are connected by a mutual friend, and having met each other about twice in the flesh, we've only ever met each other online since then, via text talk and via video calls.
It's quite normal for a lot of my friends, to be honest. But
and inevitably, at the beginning or at the end of this other podcast that we do, or randomly, through WhatsApp or what have you, we would start discussing topics of general techiness, sort of centered around tech, and some of them were, here's a particular kind of tool that I'm using, or here's a particular kind of problem that I've got. And other things was, whoa, this thing has come up in the news, and what do we think about that? And what we wanted to do, or rather, what we discussed about doing with Tech 0.0 was bringing those kind of conversations that we were having into a podcast. And what we've ended up doing is a far more structured and hopefully better sounding version of those conversations. So that's sort of, from my side, where we came from. Certainly for me, as I was talking to Chris before we started, certainly from my point of view, I thought we were going to come in a bit more with the tech-heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that I know that my tech knowledge, and I suspect Chris as well, is very sort of domain-specific.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know how I do a subset of Kubernetes things in my job. And I am not well placed to sit here and say, this is how you should do things. Because I can't even tell you the entirety of the way I do things.
Mm-hmm.
I can just go, this is a little bit that I do. And while I very much enjoy that, I am not authoritative on it. The political side of things is extremely interesting. It's interesting to hear other people's views on it, because unlike pure technology, with which you have to generally research through maybe doing a course or reading documentation and practicing, through the act of discussion, you can grow when it comes to political discussions, just by talking about it and hearing somebody else's point of view, when married up with your point of view, can give you a new perspective and allow you to grow. And so that's sort of one of the big parts why I like this aspect of the show that we do.
Yeah, so I think it's very similar. Like you sort of explained how he started things from a sort of practical point of view, and obviously, my memory of that is all very similar. The politics side of it, I kind of already knew that we were going to have some discussions about. Like we both want to. I think the one that really stands out when I think back to it is, and they're trying it again, so we might have to do another episode. But the UK trying to bring in legislation on pornography and making it require identification. And obviously sold as an age ID law, which a lot of people will go, yes, that makes sense, but without realizing that it requires them to be able to identify the exact user at that time, and without really understanding the harm that can cause. And I think it was that episode that we did, and I listened back to it afterwards, and it was really, really good. And I personally really like the balance between sort of a political, human-centered discussion based around technology, and I started trying to find more of those kind of things to talk about as a result of that, and I think it definitely started slanting towards that. But I still really enjoy, even the recent episode we did was very tech-heavy with, I've forgotten it now, FQ Coddle.
FQ Coddle.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I talked about now. About FQ Coddle, and I spoke about open standards.
Yeah, and that was great as well. Like, and even open standards and sort of longevity of hardware still has a political aspect, because we're both there advocating for like right to repair and having hardware last longer, and making sure companies provide software updates for longer. Like, that's still a political view on it. You're still talking about how it should work.
One of the big things when it comes to so unless you're somebody that whose ideology is I go out frequently and buy hardware that I'm going to be locked into and purchase software that I'm going to be locked into, if any of that sounds like wrong to you, or that doesn't fit to you, maybe you do subscribe to hardware that you can't do what you want with, but you are a big open source fanatic, or other, vice versa. There is there's an ideological basis for open source. There's ideological basis for having hardware that you can repair, that you can do what you want with, that feeds into this political discussion. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, that's a good example of how technology is just fundamentally political. Like, it is going to affect people's lives, and we've clearly seen people using it to gain more power in society. And gain more resources or status for themselves as well, both on smaller scales and much larger scales. And I think if we were making this podcast without that discussion, without that acknowledgement in there, you're kind of missing a whole section of the topic. It's just like the elephant in the room. Why are they not talking about it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's something that I missed in this discussion. A lot of the people, or certainly a number of the people who were working to deal with Basecamp's internal sort of inclusion and diversity issues, a lot of them had participated in this list of nicknames. And were kind of trying to fix their own mistake. And that seemed to just make the leadership even less likely to listen to them, because they were like, "Why are you doing this? It was your list, or you were involved too." And I think it's really important that we acknowledge the ability for people to actually learn and improve and grow and develop. I don't think that happens overnight, sure, but I think a lot of the people there clearly had, as I think we all have, maybe not really understood the consequences of things when they were younger, and as they'd gotten older started to be like, oh, I need to be better than this.
One of the things that I've heard frequently, I guess over the last 10, 12 years, is that when talking about politics, I'm going to be vaguely referencing British politics here because I don't pay too much attention of non-British politics. You'll often be a politician will often be held to something that they said months or years ago, potentially decades ago. Back in the 80s, you said this. This was your stance. And the thing is that forgets that people change and people grow and people's views change based on what they learn. And I think there is a difference. There is a difference between growing and flip-flopping.
Yeah, totally. It's sometimes difficult to tell that difference, but
absolutely, you can change your opinion based on the situation that you're in, and that isn't growing. That is just trying to be popular. But it's right that your views from 10 years ago, from 5 years ago, are different than they are today. Because if they aren't, you've stood still in a world that moves forwards.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've all had access to so much more information online about the difficulties that lots of different types of people face in their life. And maybe I'm a little bit of an optimist at times. I hope that that's going to lead to real change. It's very easy to go online and see a lot of anger and hatred that is definitely there. But I think the number of people I've seen learn and stand up for those that are less advantaged to them has been growing since I've been online.
Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel, linked in the show notes. You can also follow us on Twitter at tech_point_0. We hope you join us again for the next episode.
Bye.